Hello, friends. You guys like Philip Glass? You know who I'm talking about? Sort of avant garde composer who did things like Einstein on the Beach, and he did the music for that movie Koyaanisqatsi and things like that, where it was a kind of a repetitious, kind of like gamelan style music where there's these repeating patterns, and sometimes some patterns move faster than other patterns, and then eventually they sync up. But it's the kind of music that you can listen to with the headphones and you can get into this rhythm, and it is repetitious, but repetition can sometimes be hypnotic. And there was a genre, I guess. I've talked about this genre in other podcasts, and I don't like to use the term for it for some reason. I just think I don't know, I don't know why it's called krautrock, but I always hate saying that. But anyway, some German bands got into a style of music that I think sort of pioneered that idea of this repetition. It wasn't the music wasn't varied. They would get into a groove and they would just roll with that groove. And a lot of times the drum was called a motoric beat because it sounded like a machine. It sounded like a mechanical process. Some other drummers who have done that in other bands that are more familiar are the drummer in Devo, the Devo's first drummer, Alan, who just had like a metronome. He was like a human drum machine. And that sort of human drum machine idea is in this German kind of pop, which I think informed perhaps Philip Glass and those kinds of musicians who were using that hypnotic nature of repeating patterns and repeating things, which goes back. I've said this before to I think like gamelan music. I've seen some live music played on those instruments in Thailand, and it really does repeat. And the at first it sounds like a cacophony, like chaos, like just guys banging on pots and pans. At first, to my Western trained ears, my Beatles ears, you go to a different country and you hear their music. Sometimes it hits you wrong, and you're like, that doesn't make musical sense to me. But then if you stay with it, what's really interesting about world music and about other music of other cultures is that we get accustomed to our own culture's music and our own culture's tonalities, and then we go to another country and their music sounds alien at first. But if you keep listening to it, you realize that the people who created that music and listen to that music are also human beings. They have the same machinery inside their ears and their brains. And suddenly, after a while, it may take a minute, but give it some time because it's worth it. You will find it. You'll find that music. And even if it's strange, un unmusical sounding to your ears at first, like some Asian music, like Chinese traditional music sometimes, or Japanese traditional, or Thai traditional music. You get into it, and after a while, you realize you're enjoying it, and you realize you know it, you got it, you finally found it. It's like finding something. It's like learning to read. It's like learning a new language. Suddenly, that noise coming out of that person's mouth, suddenly it's words and sentences and stories, and you know now what they're saying. It's that way with music. And I think sometimes music uses repetition and cycles, these kind of rhythms that are almost like the rhythms of your heartbeat, and you're running, you're walking. People run, and you're breathing while you're running as your feet hit the ground and your breath is breathing. Those are two rhythms that interact with each other. And I think that kind of stuff finds its way into our music. Those kind of natural rhythms, the rhythms that we hear when we when we listen to machines or machinery now, becomes a part of it as well, because that's a part of our lives now too. We hear machines, we hear motors, engines, that motor thing, and it goes back to that motoric beat of some of the German pop music, which takes us into things like Philip Glass again, where his music is a lot of times piano, a lot of times voices that are just singing sort of staccato notes, like pizzicato, da, 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 and those things repeat. And those, I think, are born out of modern times, like modern rhythms, which I think is why Philip Glass's music was used in the films in the Koyaanisqatsi. First of all, because that is a movie where it's a movie about modern society juxtaposed with nature, and it shows the speed of traffic and technology and factories and people walking and stopping and crosswalks and intersections and traffic. Those rhythmic motions of civilization and the rhythm of life, daily life, the things that we modern people living in 2023, which the futuristic year of 200 million, 23, whatever it is, we know that stuff. That stuff is our nature. We know factories, we know traffic, cars, we know the rhythms of machinery and the pulse of daily life. And for us, it's a lot faster than it may have been for our ancestors. But music sometimes reflects that. Music evolves with us, and I think it becomes faster and more intense and sometimes more repetitious as our lives become faster, more intense, and more repetitious. And there are some bands who have, the German bands I was talking about, and Philip Glass, and some bands have tried it. Some bands tried it a little bit too soon, and people didn't quite get it, yet. But there's a band from New York in the 80s that I think was experimenting with that, and they worked with Philip Glass. He produced them. The band is called Polyrock, which is a great name for them because polyrhythms and multi-rhythms, polyrock, it's a rock band because they have guitar, drums, and bass and singing. But they played in a kind of motoric way, in a kind of, German pop genre that I was talking about, and kind of a Philip Glass vibe to them. And the band I'm talking about is Polyrock, and this is their album. This is I believe, their first album. It's got a song on here called No Love Lost that is just great. Romantic Me. So many really good songs on here. Really, really good songs. There's the band. I think the cover was made and the photographs were made with a color Xerox machine. Back in those days, that was pretty modern to put photographs on a color Xerox machine and make copies, and you could get these kind of cool degraded kind of look to the artwork. This pattern here as well, which takes a photograph to its essence, I guess, in a way that perhaps they were trying to do with music. Like they were trying to, I believe, I don't want to speak for them, but I think with some bands like this, what they're trying to do is kind of their reduction, reductivist or whatever it's called, where they're trying to find the essence of pop music, the beat, the rhythm, the repeating melodies, and to the point where it becomes trance-like, or it induces kind of a trance where you get into this rhythm of it that repeats itself, and you don't really have to think too much about it because it's not super complicated music. It's very forward-moving momentum kind of music, like Kraftwerk in a way, but this is more guitar, drums, and bass and vocal oriented, more post-punk type of sound. It sounds very New York, very Philip Glass. It's an album that you should look for. They did another album as well. I think they did maybe 2 or 3 albums. I'm not sure. I should look this stuff up before I go on air with my opinions. But this band Polyrock, I believe they were one of the bands that played at the CBGB Club and all that. They were around in the kind of days when bands like Television were also doing a kind of repetitious, rhythmic reduced to its essence kind of pop. And but then television added those, like what I was talking about before, the kind of gamelan type rhythms where they were repeating guitar parts that kind of cycled around and matched up with each other, synchronized, and then went out of sync with each other, that kind of thing. And harmonics and polyrhythms and things like that. But anyway, Polyrock, you don't really hear too much about them. You don't really know what happened to them. You look them up. There's some sad stories about them, but they were one of those bands I think that just didn't happen for them. It didn't happen for them the way it did for some other bands. And I think they maybe had other skills. It's not necessarily, when a band doesn't continue on and on and on forever, it's not necessarily because of failure. I know from experience, and I know people who played in bands who only were doing it for a little while, even though they became famous. Once they, finished school or whatever, they were like, okay, I'm bye to the music industry. I'm going to go become a nuclear physicist or whatever. And it's not necessarily a failure or the fact that their band failed. It's just that sometimes people only want to do it for a while. And I think that's what maybe happened with Polyrock, because I think everybody else sort of went off into other directions after they did this fantastic body of musical work. That's what I think anyway. But yeah, Polyrock, look them up, see if you can find them. Find their records out there. I think there's some videos on YouTube. I know I say that all the time, but that's where you can kind of taste music, take a little bit of, have a little sample, see if you like them. I think you will. I think they're a bit ahead of their time, perhaps, and really fun to listen to. An interesting band, interesting connection to Philip Glass if you're a Philip Glass fan, and Polyrock. I recommend them. And I will talk to you again real soon.